Though Sephiroth is, of course, the primary villain in Final Fantasy VII, the Shinra Electric Power Company, usually referred to only as Shinra, also serves as a major and prominent antagonist for much of the story. Shinra has its fingers in a lot of pies: energy processing, military, urban development, space exploration, genetics, and so much more. And the company exerts a lot of influence in various spheres. Clearly, they cast a long shadow over the planet of Gaia, but things didn't start out that way for them. When Shinra first started out as a company, it was known as Shinra Manufacturing Works. And what did they manufacture? Weapons. That was the bread and butter for this organization in its infancy: manufacturing and supply of weapons. Soon, however, the company discovered that lifestream, which is essentially the life force of the entire planet, could be processed into a form of usable energy, which they dubbed Mako. And processing lifestream into Mako and selling it quickly became their primary business. This, however, took a toll on the planet itself. The company continued to indiscriminately suck life out of the planet literally, and this caused rapid degradation of the environment and dealt major damage to wildlife as well. This in particular would give rise to plenty of dissent against the company, but we'll get to that in a bit. As you might imagine, being dominant in the field of processing and supplying this new source of energy proved to completely transform them in more ways than one. They started off by placing Mako reactors all over the planet. This was followed quickly by immense financial growth, which was reflected in equally rapid growth of influence in political spheres as well. Shinra used this to branch out into multiple other fields, from military to space exploration, but the one that would prove to be the backbone of the organization, nearly as important as lifestream processing itself, was genetics. Using genetics, they created all sorts of experiments, many of which would be weaponized. They also used genetics along with a combination of exposure to raw Mako energy to create a line of elite super soldiers, part of their own private military group known as Soldier. Though Shinra employed many regular fighters and infantrymen as well, soldiers were their pack leaders. With a large and formidable private military at their disposal, and with a complete monopoly over the planet's most used and most popular energy source, Shinra's influence grew exponentially. Eventually, they created an entire city dedicated to their cause, Midgar, the most technologically advanced city on all of Gaia, which would become the seat of the company's power and essentially the capital of the planet. Soon, Shinra had even grown to the extent that it essentially owned and exerted complete control over the entire world's information and broadcasting networks, the primary of which was one of their own, called Shinra News. The company used these to spread propaganda, weaponizing misinformation and fake news against its enemies, and fooling the general populace, primarily the people of Midgar, into believing things were rosier than they actually were. Shinra also adopted a new project down the line, after conducting research into the Cetra, an ancient race that had almost completely dwindled from Gaia. They started searching for a location from their legends known only as the Promised Land, which was said to be a source of vast amounts of lifestream. Shinra wanted to find this place and build their new seat of power around it to process even more Mako. Using their genetics wing, they had also been trying for a long time to create a person with the powers of a Cetra, one who would be able to lead them to the Promised Land. This, as you can imagine, led to many abductions, experiments on abductees that were unethical to the point of being torture, and more. But none of this yielded the results they were hoping for. Their obsession with the Cetra had various byproducts as well, including a certain member of Soldier, who would go on to become the crown jewel in all of their shady creations. To learn more about him, though, there's something else we need to provide a brief primer on: Genova, an ancient extraterrestrial being with incredible abilities. When Shinra discovered its remains, they mistook it to be an ancient member of the Cetra race. One particular Shinra scientist, Professor Hojo, who was at the time working under Shinra's top researcher, Professor Gast, injected cells from the Genova into his pregnant wife, hoping that the child she would give birth to would have the powers of a Cetra. The child's fetal form did merge with the Genova cells, which would go on to manifest as supernatural abilities, but the results that Hojo was hoping for, that the baby would be born with Cetra abilities were not achieved. When the child was born, he was taken away by Shinra, never even to be held in his mother's arms. Shinra would train him and recruit him as one of their super soldiers. They would tell him nothing of his father, and would only tell him that his mother was Genova. That child's name? Sephiroth. We'll be discussing Sephiroth and his full story in much greater detail in a feature dedicated entirely to him. For now, let's get back to Shinra, because there's a lot more to talk about there. Something did happen while Shinra was in the middle of searching for the Promised Land that threw a wrench into their plans. Shinra exerted a great deal of control over the entire planet, but that didn't mean they had nobody opposing them through any of this. The first people who prominently did so were the nation of Wutai. When the president of Shinra, known simply as President Shinra, proposed to erect Mako reactors in Wutai, the nation declined their proposal. In retaliation, Shinra declared war on Wutai. Though the ensuing conflict was long and bloody, after 9 years of fighting, it led to Wutai's unconditional surrender. The long war, however, did slow down Shinra's other plans, what with the fighting itself demanding most of their resources and attention. Other dissenters rose up against Shinra as well. There was the eco-terrorist group Avalanche, which took issue with the company's indiscriminate exploitation of the planet and its lifestream, and fought to liberate Wutai from Shinra's control, though the first incarnation of this group would also go on to face defeat at the hands of the Megacorp. Later, one of Shinra's own, a rogue soldier called Genesis Rhapsody, also led an uprising against them. Called the Genesis War, the conflict started when the soldier member discovered the origins of his powers, and how he had been injected with Genova cells before being manipulated by Shinra's Professor Hollander, who was locked in a power struggle with Professor Hojo, into leading a retaliation against the company. They were also secretly backed and funded by Lazard de Sericus, the director of the soldier program. However, this conflict too would end in a victory for Shinra, and the deaths of Genesis, Hollander, and Lazard. Genesis was not the only soldier member who would rebel against Shinra. Other high-ranking soldiers such as Zack Fair and Angel Hewley did so as well, but both of them were killed as a result. Years after the end of the Genesis War, Avalanche emerged once again, this time led by one Barrett Wallace, along with other prominent members such as Tifa Lockhart and mercenary Cloud Strife. This time operating in Midgar itself, and attempting to sabotage Shinra's operations by blowing up Mako reactors. However, the biggest thorn in Shinra's side would prove to be a warrior they'd considered one of their greatest creations for a very long time, Sephiroth, yet another soldier who would go rogue when he learned the truth about his birth and the nature of his abilities. But unlike the others before him, Sephiroth went rogue in ways even more destructive than how the company had operated its entire life. In one attack that Sephiroth led on Shinra's headquarters in Midgar, President Shinra was killed, which led to his son Rufus Shinra stepping in and taking charge. Eventually, when Sephiroth summoned Meteor as part of his plans to harm the planet and absorb the lifestream that would consequently emerge, that awoke something else as well. Known simply as weapons, these were ancient biomechanical engines of destruction that had been created thousands of years ago to fight against Genova. Though they had been in a deep slumber for a long time, when they sensed the threat of Meteor, they autonomously reawakened. These weapons, whose primary purpose was to protect the planet from harm, would go on to destroy most of Shinra's sites of power, and deal devastating blows to the corporation as a result. By the time the conflict against Sephiroth had ended, Shinra had been weakened greatly. Meanwhile, with the population of the planet also having now figured out how precious and vital Lifestream was to the survival of Gaia and themselves, it also became impossible for Shinra to exploit it as an energy source going forward, and so the one silver lining to emerge from the unfortunate and bloody conflict with Sephiroth was the dissolution of the Shinra Electric Power Company. With the upcoming Final Fantasy VII Remake being set entirely in Midgar, we can expect Shinra to play a major role in the game. They are essentially going to be its primary antagonists, though Sephiroth will of course appear and have a major role to play in the story, given that the game is focused entirely on just the first half dozen hours of the original Final Fantasy VII. Shinra are likely to be the dominant foes that Cloud and company will face off against. How well the remake is able to adapt them and the various characters attached to them, and whether it'll be able to do justice to their iconic story, remains to be seen, but based on everything we've seen so far, we're quite optimistic, to say the least. Thankfully, Final Fantasy VII Remake is out just a few days from now, so it shouldn't be too long before we discover that for ourselves. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, please hit the subscribe button. Also, don't forget to switch on the notifications bell icon next to it. That way you'll never miss any of our videos. Thanks for watching.